Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Steggles from YPO Gold, Washington, D.C. chapter, Baltimore. I'm the co-founder and co-chair of HigherLogic, a SaaS community collaboration platform for software companies and associations. I'm also the assistant learning chair for the YPO Technology Network. And today we're going to be talking to Dan Malven and Fred Thiel about the future of entrepreneurship globally. As a YPO and an EO member, I'm particularly interested in their views on this. Dan is managing director with 4490 Ventures, a Series A focused tech VC firm. He's founded several software companies, so he's actually been in the weeds before he, as I jokingly say to him, went on the dark side. He invests in and exits numerous startups, 4 of which have actually reached an IPO, exited in an IPO. Resulting in over 500 million in gains. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Fred. Fred's the chair of the Tech Network. He's our esteemed leader for this show. He's also the chair and CEO of Thiel Advisors in Laguna Beach, California. He spends his time helping others create and grow great businesses. Fred actually helped me a few times when I was kind of in the growth stage of mine. He advises private equity, venture capital, investors, founders, boards of directors, and management teams on trends, leadership and innovation, strategies for growth, value creation, and ultimately exit preparation. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So before we get started, just a couple of reminders. If you have any questions, please submit them via the comments section. And then we'll jump right into it. Dan. With most businesses grinding to a halt these days, what effects has the COVID-19 pandemic had on the VC investment firms like yours?
It's actually been kind of the opposite for us. A tremendous amount of motion going on, either discussing with the teams about salary, headcount reductions, furloughs, PPP loan program. How much runway do you have in various different scenarios, and do you lean into certain part of your business, product development, if the go-to-market is dragging. So it's every venture capitalist I've spoken with is saying the same thing. We've never been busier than we have last month.
And that's really with as an operator, investor operator, you're kind of diving in the weeds, helping your portfolio companies navigate. What about deal flow? I mean, is this an opportune time to get great values on recession sensitive, great businesses?
It is. Most people who've been in the venture business for a long time, both as the investors or the limited partners, will tell you that the best returns probably in a decade are going to be from investments that are planted over the next 12 to 18 months for a variety of reasons. It's not just the buy-in price that you're getting into. It's also because the companies are able to, the stronger companies can recruit talent. So there's a complete kind of, when too much capital is in the industry, there's a dilution of talent. Too many businesses getting funded, hiring away too many engineers and too many managers. And when that goes down, then the best become more available at cheaper prices on the talent side. So that's why we think that the best returns are going to come from the best companies because they're going to be built. Their core teams are going to be formed over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, so we're kind of going through a right-sizing phase in value and whatnot. So with that in mind, Fred, as an advisor, what effects has the COVID-19 pandemic had on the companies you advise?
Well, let's just say I'm very, very busy right now. As we look in the private equity world, for example, not dissimilar to what Dan just said, you have companies are going through all sorts of triage. So if they're essential businesses, I have some portfolio companies that I advise, for example, where they're doing record months of sales right now with half the staff in the facility and the rest of the people working from home because they're an essential business providing products or technology solutions to people like Amazon and others. As you look down kind of to the less essential businesses, it's then a question of, okay, how do we really maintain cash levels and capital such that we're not going to be negatively affected on the other side of this situation. So they furlough people. If they can't furlough people, they have to let them go. Take advantage of the PPP program, which, as you're well familiar, most probably ran out of funding yesterday. And so there are a lot of companies that still haven't received their funding, and hopefully they'll, the federal government will top it up again. But I think it's really a question of, how do you preserve capital? How do you preserve your key people? What can you do to really maintain your business? And a lot of people are really evaluating pivots. And this is where a lot of my work is starting to focus now. We've done the triage. We've done okay, how are we going to sustain the business for an extended period of time at this lower kind of revenue levels? It's what do we do afterwards? And what are we going to do differently? Lots of companies are looking at strategies around remote work. How do you focus more on, for example, servicing clients without actually being face-to-face with them? How do you deliver goods without them walking into a store or a showroom? How do you deal with being able to create demand and maintain a relationship with your customers when there's no way for them to walk in the store and kind of look at things? So I think we're seeing a lot of very interesting shifts that will occur in businesses. If anything, obviously, e-commerce is going to increase. I think we're going to see the big box guys actually making big gains here. At the unfortunate, cost of the small retailers who just are undercapitalized, don't have the buying power that the big guys do, and that really, can't survive an extended downturn here. And it's one thing for a Walmart which has a lot of square footage, to have a limited number of people in their store, but a small boutique only allowing a small handful of people in the store at a time can be devastating for them. So. I think this is going to be very interesting to see. You'll have some new winners and, unfortunately, some new losers.
Yeah, I think the theme from both of you is that trying to anticipate what the new norm is going to be, and whether the model that your portfolio companies are adopting or advising, will survive, right? And where do you need to make the pivot? But with that in mind, we actually had a question already from the audience. What kind of leadership would you recommend to be adopted to direct the change in this current situation? Fred, any thoughts?
Sure. Very strong leadership. In times of crisis, people want strong leaders, and not strong by meaning authoritarian, but leaders with a clear vision, leaders who believe in transparency, who are sharing exactly what's going on, leaders who are informing and continually communicating with their people. Anytime there's uncertainty, people want certainty. And how do you provide certainty? It's by being in front of people, communicating with them, and being a leader, and then providing a vision for where you're going to go. And maybe that vision short term is, we don't know, but we're going to try a lot of things. Or maybe it's, we're going to hunker down, and as we come out the other side, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. And it's the leaders that can win over people's hearts and maintain those hearts and minds that are critical in times like this. So, my advice to everybody is, step out in front of your customers, step out in front of your vendors, step out in front of your teams, and talk.
Yeah, Dan, anything to add?
Yeah, I just to follow on with that, some of the talking points that I'm giving my portfolio CEOs and executive teams are: remember that people don't work for companies; people work for people. And you've got to show, the transparency and the human side of yourself. I mean, if you're struggling with young kids at home, chances are your employees are too. Don't shy away from that. Don't try and put up the front that everything is just not changing around you as well. And so the more you can connect and with them on a more human level, the more loyalty and the more inspiring you'll be to your employees.
Yeah, very cool. It sounds like vulnerability is a key attribute there, and I think the companies, from my experience with leaders with the highest emotional intelligence, are the ones probably are going to do a better job. But Fred, to your point, I mean, I couldn't emphasize enough. just be decisive, right? People don't like indecision. They don't like uncertainty. And so trying to predict, we're dealing with unknown unknowns, but actually trying to project certainty, make the decisions to work from home, right from the get-go. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of that in the public arena at the moment, but it's something that I think people are realizing that's necessary. So
there's a great definition, by the way, Andy. Fear is just a lack of data. Right? If you have data, you know what's going to happen. Fear is just your imagination running wild, and scenario playing in your brain. So.
Exactly. We've got a whole bunch of questions coming in, but I'll choose one from Raymond Tukotsky from LinkedIn. Where will the venture focus be now during COVID? Dan, probably one for you.
So, there are certain, sectors that are going to be in more favor right now, but those are mostly for later stage investors. If you're talking about an early stage, Series A, seed A, B, we're really investing for exits that are going to be 5 to 7 years out. And so we don't really try and time sectors. It just doesn't work. So, I think it's going to be more about the ability to raise and lean in. There's going to be more about the relationships you can create with your investors and the transparency and vision you can talk about for how things are going to be in 3, 5, 7 years. So I would say one of the areas that are changing a lot is in this near-term environment is it's very hard to raise money from people you don't have a relationship with already. And because you're not meeting them face to face, you're not able to spend the time that way. So it's go back, whether it's your existing investors, which is obviously the one way to go, but if it's new investors, go back into who you've at least met before and engaged with on some level, because trying to create a new relationship in this environment to where then you're talking about getting married for 5 to 7 years, that's a really tall order, and you might not get the yield out of spending that time that way.
Got it. So it's not necessarily around that VCs are looking at how recession sensitive a particular business is. Although I will say that it reminds me, I can't remember where the quote come from, but I heard that it takes 30 days to create a habit, right? And by the time we're out of this, we're going to be way beyond that. We're already beyond the 30 days. And people now have, for example, got in a habit of not going to Starbucks, right? They're not eating out, 2 or 3 nights a week or whatever their habit used to be. And so, that's definitely going to have an impact on certain types of businesses where, they rely on people traveling or attending events or if you're in the, feel bad for the hoteliers, amongst us, but, it's not a rosy outlook until we can get the habit thing addressed. So, with that, we have another question as well. Fred, this is really directed to you. How can businesses that are not likely to receive the next round of funding survive? Any suggestions on that?
Well, I think part of it is if you have a compelling business thesis and you've proven product market fit, so you're post Series A typically, there are opportunities to get bridge funding. You can do bridge loans with your existing investors. You can do things ahead of hitting your metrics for your typical Series B. I think part of it is really going to come down to your investors' belief in the viability long-term of the business. I know, for example, in the private equity world, it's very common right now to be looking at, okay, can we buy down debt? In the last Great Recession, a lot of amazing returns were made by simply buying down debt at pennies on the dollar. I don't think the banks have gotten to the point yet where they're selling off their loan portfolios at those levels. But that's an area where you can get extended runways as well. One of the restrictions I think a lot of venture capitalists have is the amount they can allocate to any one portfolio company. And the question is there enough buffer in that money so that you can bridge before a Series B? But I think at the end of the day, it's about portfolio preservation. And what are the 4 or 5 companies in your portfolio of 15 that you think are absolutely the ones that you want to have viable at the end of this period that we're in? And how do you shore up those, whether it's additional funding, finding additional investors? But I think venture capitalists like Dan are very focused on unfortunately doing triage in the portfolio, picking the ones that are important to keep, and finding whatever ways they can to raise capital for them. But I think it's capital preservation is a combination of the ugliness of not paying your vendors and reducing headcount, which takes money out of the economy, unfortunately, and then dealing with the fact that your customers might not be paying you. And that's the biggest issue right now, is the fact that there is now so much inertia in capital flows in the economy that is the bigger threat for companies than just burn rate.
Yeah, and the DSO, the days sales outstanding, is for many companies is going to take a hit. I mean, if you're a company that generates paper invoices and mails them out in a more traditional sense, that's an issue, right? Because the person on the other end isn't there necessarily to open and receive or process them. And who's to say that even when they get them, it's going to go into a system that's electronic? Dan, in your opinion, what are the factors to considering when deciding to attempt to fundraise? I've got a bunch of entrepreneur buddies that they've just been gearing up for that first fundraise. They've bootstrapped the company to date. They've done well. The recession hits. It's like, what do we do? And from my own experience, I founded with a buddy of mine, HigherLogic, in 2008. It was a tough time, but it depends on the business proposition and the recession sensitivity. But so what do you think, Dan, in terms of what are the factors to consider?
Yeah, kind of what I mentioned before about do you have an existing relationship with investors? And those are the ones that you're going to have a better, higher likely of yield on your time spent with them, because they can get there faster. So we have a relatively small concentrated portfolio. And for example, we're in the middle of 2 term sheets right now, making new investments. But it's because we had relationships with them. And one is affected by the current pandemic. The other one isn't really. But that wasn't as much of a factor for us. I think that you also need to be able to articulate a lot more scenario planning than you could before when you're raising, and be prepared for those kinds of questions. We're going through that right now in our diligence. It's like, okay, I got to know whether if it ends here, and your burn rate. And one of the things we're encouraging our portfolio companies and prospective portfolio companies is think about your employees in the same way the government thinks about businesses, which are some are essential and some are not in this environment. And typically, and you have to make the hard calls. Your engineering and product talent, you're protecting them above everything else, because you're going to lean into product development here if you want to be successful. And your sales and marketing talent, maybe for the next 6-12 months, maybe not so essential. And make your decisions accordingly, and be able to articulate that to investors. So it puts a much higher bar on preparedness for a fundraise, being able to answer all the different kinds of questions in diligence, because the one thing that will have gone away is the competitive environment among investors. There's that's the competitive environment. We have multiple investors trying to get into a company. That drives timeline, it drives amount, drives valuation. That's what's reducing. So when it's a buyer's market, they're going to take a lot more time to get to their decision because they can. because they don't have the dynamic of multiple term sheets generally.
So I've got a couple of questions related to, operations of a company. On the one hand, you can, certainly cut costs, try and preserve the EBITDA margin or, some of the metric that you focus on. But on the other hand, you could, plan for the worst case and make a lot of brutal decisions. What is your general take on how reactive / proactive for the rest of the year should we be looking at our business? Should we be taking a brutal cut approach, or more perhaps a slightly less more conservative approach? Fred, what's your take on when you're speaking with your portfolio companies? What do you tell them? How much you cut?
Well, it's a question of it's not how much, it's how long can you survive at the current economic situation. Now take a 30% decrease from where it is today relative to your business flows, and how long can you survive, and can you make it into the spring of next year? If you can't make it into the spring of next year, you've got to cut back until you can get to the spring of next year. We're not going to get out of this anytime quickly. It varies by industry. Airbnb, as an example, they just raised now $2 billion at an average of 9% interest. This is in a 0% interest world, at an equity valuation that's half of what they were valued last round, $18 billion. So here's a company that clearly people believe in long-term, but that has a burn rate, and they don't want to let go of employees. Marriott furloughed 10,000 people, Airbnb, obviously much lower employee count overall, but they're focused more on preserving their talent and their people. So I think it really is a question: can you make it to the spring? If you can make it to the spring, figure out how to get there. I think the world will be a different place then. The question is just, if you're a travel related or entertainment venue related business, it's going to be much longer. You're going to have to pivot your business. Movie theaters are going to have to start renting out their venues for the equivalent of socially distanced conferences. So instead of 2,500 people converging in Las Vegas, it's a bunch of people in cinemas converging around the country that don't have to get on airplanes, don't have to stay in hotels, and they can meet and live stream. It's things like that.
Yeah. And again, organizations that have big events, people are going to be much less willing or to attend large global events, right? In-person events versus I'd be slightly more comfortable going to this regional event where there aren't so many people from disparate parts of the world, where, perhaps the virus is not as controlled as it is in other places.
Yeah. I give one rule of thumb we're giving to our portfolio companies and others, and as we go through these financings, is it used to be you'd want enough capital to get you through 18 months. And this is in the earlier stages of businesses, right? Seeds A, sometimes B. 18 months of capital. We've changed that to be 24 months. And we tell them, and that 24 months may keep getting pushed out. 3 months from now, we may say, you still need 24 months from now. 6 months, you may still need 24 months from now, because until the corner is turned, then it's the 24-month capital is the rule of thumb we're using.
Dan, I got to tell you, I got goosebumps when you said that. I'm like, wow, that's such a different world from There's a lot of entrepreneurs watching this that are don't have any funding and are bootstrapped, and how different it is when for the first couple of years with HigherLogic, I think we could probably survive about 2 or 3 weeks if if things suddenly grind to a halt. The thought of 18, 24 months was just not.
Well,
again on the
zero revenue. I'm saying make assumptions about your revenue, but
yeah, very cool. And by the way, Kerry Butt, actually one of our viewers, pointed out that isn't this an opportunity for more goodwill for small businesses in crisis? And I think we're seeing a lot of that already. For example, people call in restaurants and ordering food to be sent to, frontline, first line responders and things like that. But are you looking at it that way? Do you see for your smaller companies, hey, this is an opportunity, not just it's not all negative. There are some, there is some light there. And in terms of, other businesses and business owners looking to, all right, maybe we can help you. Everybody's trying to, do some good for others because they're all in it together.
Yeah, definitely. Company sponsored, goodwill activities are most of the portfolio companies I'm seeing are doing something like that. Again, because we're all, taking the opportunity to connect as people, either with your employees or customers or whatever, just strengthens the bonds for when the world does return back to normal. Companies are definitely organizing activities for, whether it's for first responders, for whomever, the essential workers. That it's a good opportunity to build your culture and build connections outside of your company.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Fred, we've had a few industry-specific questions, which I was tempted to hold off on these, but specifically for the construction industry and for the travel industry, how do you think in the long term this crisis might affect them? And I realize that you're not necessarily an expert in those things, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Specifically.
So I think the travel industry is going through a major pivot. So we are going into a world of anti-globalization in the sense that people are shrinking the regions where they're going to be traveling to. If for you to travel into Europe is going to require you to have 14 days of quarantine or longer potentially, or prove somehow that you have been vaccinated or have some form of antibodies, it's going to make it very difficult to travel outside of the US for a lot of people. And people are going to be scared to anyway. Who wants to be stuck and not be able to come back in or have to be quarantined? So especially holiday travel, I see being impacted very long term, but it's going to be more regional. Airbnb is doing some very interesting things around, regional type travel activities, which I think we're going to see becoming more of a trend. The extended stay hotels in the lower service tier, so Marriott, Residence Inn, Courtyard, things like that, are going to do very well. The 5-star hotels are going to struggle because of profit margins. A low service hotel like a Courtyard or a Residence Inn, their overhead, they can be profitable at most probably around a 60% occupancy number. Whereas, a 5-star hotel needs to be, in the plus 70 plus range, which is a big difference, especially when their RevPAR, which is how they measure revenues on a per room basis, is typically, much higher than what a Residence Inn would be. And, right now you can go stay at a Four Seasons hotel if it's open for, bargain basement prices. So travel is going to be severely affected. Construction, on the other hand, I think is going to continue to do well. Construction is an essential business. The home builders in California are still building homes. Home building specifically, I think we're going to see a huge drop in home building. I think people, with the amount of capital that has been sucked out of people's portfolios and out of their pocketbooks, I think the affordability is going to be a major issue. I think commercial real estate owners have to reevaluate their business model because companies are getting used to having a workforce working from home. I don't need as much office space anymore. So how do I deal with that? Warehouse space, on the other hand, I need to have last mile logistics closer to my customers because more and more business is going online. Amazon, Walmart, all these guys, the food distributors are all looking at how do I place automated distribution facilities much closer to the endpoints of my markets. So construction is going to see just a shift in the characterization of the building, its use case, its application. The home building space, people are going to hunker down at home more. So you're going to see, I believe, quite a bit of home remodeling. But you're going to see behavioral changes across the spectrum that are going to impact industries. You mentioned restaurants. People aren't going to eat out as much. That being said, a lot of restaurants are now going to move to becoming just industrial kitchens. And, the founder of Uber is exactly in that business, very well timed, serendipity. But, it's a business where basically you operate the back end of a restaurant and you can service food where predominantly 70% of what you're selling is for delivery, and the in-house seats, the few that you have, are 10 feet apart. It's more about a special experience, and you're really making your money out the back door, so to say. So I think lots of businesses are going to have to pivot.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, especially when you consider, the industrial kitchen or the shared kitchen. The multiple food outlets using the same kitchen, similar to as you would see in an all-inclusive somewhere. Where you got 20 restaurants, but it's the same kitchen doing them. And of course, then it's going to be delivery service for the most part as well. Or there needs to be a lot of real estate for a lot of space around folks that are eating out.
Just one comment, Andy, just on the prior point you made. People's attitudes about companies are changing. So as Dan was saying, a company that publicly says, hey, we're going to keep our employees, we're going to pay danger pay for those that have to be in the warehouse, that are out there showing how they're supporting the little people, are going to win a lot of reputational points from this. And I think people are very focused on saving the small businesses in their local communities. And this whole regionalization, people are going to focus now from where do I get something as cheaply as possible to who do I really want to support? Where do I want to spend my dollars? Families are changing their interactions even. I'm hearing a lot of things about families who are actually, wow, this quarantine thing has really helped our family relationship. And so I think you're going to see more nesting coming out of this. And that's going to affect the local community, the local businesses. And it's going to be much less in the big business term, much less about driving efficiencies and much more about resilience and agility. How can you flip your supply chain on a moment's notice? How can you do things with high agility across your enterprise, not just in the software development world, but across the enterprise? How can you be more resilient across the enterprise, your supply chains, your distribution? That's what people are thinking about.
Yeah, love it. And from my own perspective, I think having longer term contracts and longer term partnership agreements with your customers, it's like, hey, look, no matter what, we've got to weather it together, and let's just both commit to each other. And I think we're going to probably see some more of that in the near future as well. So we're kind of coming up on time, but I want to ask you each, Dan first, the same question. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs in this time of crisis? Dan?
It may sound like a cliche, but it's looking for how you make lemonade out of this. There are ways to do it. And whether it's building a better culture inside your company, building better relationships more personal relationships with clients, every business is going to have some type of lemonade they can make out of these lemons that all of us are being inundated with. And those that are going to thrive out of this are the ones that are going to figure out what's going to add the most value to them out of this long term. So be creative. Think about that.
Fred, any other words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think I'll just kind of talk about. So I have a framework I talk about, which is called 6 A's. So at the end of the day, a business's goal is to activate its users, right? They want to make sure that the users are using the product and they're either buying more of the product or they're using, if it's a time-based product, using it more and promoting it. To do that, they have to have a really amazing customer experience. They have to be happy. If they're not happy, they're not going to use it. They're not going to buy it. So what do companies have to focus on to get to that goal? It's a question of what can you automate? What can you accelerate? What can you anticipate? And how do you adapt? And you do this in a never-ending cycle. And I think the small and medium businesses have a huge advantage over the big enterprises because big enterprises have huge inertia to change, and they're very slow. And for change to have an effect, there have to be very big dollars associated to it. Small and medium-sized businesses can experiment, and it's just about experimentation, find out what works. To Dan's point, it's, get creative, figure out things that work, test concepts, and then adapt. And then go back and look, how can I do this faster? How can I do it with less people? How can I do it and understand what's going to happen next? And how do I adapt to that? And just keep cycling.
Yeah, I mean, the nimbleness of your average entrepreneur is definitely a strategic advantage over the more established businesses. So assuming they're at the earlier stage, I absolutely agree. One final question, everybody I know is doing something to help in this COVID crisis, and it really touches me, right there in terms of there's so much good coming out of this, as terrible as this crisis is. Any shout out you want to give to anybody that either you or your business or any of your portfolio companies are doing that have you think making a difference?
From my side, one of my portfolio companies, a company called Dorner Manufacturing in Heartland, Wisconsin, makes material handling systems, conveyor systems, and they are doing amazing things to supply necessary equipment to all the people making masks, PPE, food distribution across a variety of industries. They're one of these companies that's thriving, but having to do it in a way to maintain safety with their employees with much fewer people. And, it's great. You see these great stories of CEOs on the factory floor working hand in hand with their people. And, just companies like that are really supporting their communities and supporting the other companies. Just kudos to them.
Cool. Fred, any from you that jump to mind?
I'd say one of our portfolio companies is Eat Street, which is a restaurant delivery service. So you can imagine businesses going through the roof. And we focus on smaller geographies, and whereas Grubhub, Uber Eats, et cetera, they're in the big cities. We're in the smaller geographies. And there's a different dynamic to that. And they are really focusing on the communities that whether it's discounts, whether it's extra protection for drivers, doing all sorts of things that just embed them more in the hearts and minds of the communities they serve. And so I think that they've been doing a great job and dealing with a tremendous disruption, while at the same time tremendous increased demand for their core service.
Cool, thanks, Dan. Great example as well as yours, Fred. So I finally just want to give a shout out. I've been working round the clock the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks actually, with a bunch of YPOs as well as EOs on a kind of a joint collective non-profit initiative to help this millionlives.org. And it's basically trying to get the PPE equipment to where it's most needed without incurring any overhead costs through any middleman, direct from the factories direct to where it's needed. So there are so many, just that one of 30 different people from 30 different countries were helping contribute to it. So just another example of people pulling together and trying to do good and do right to help the rest of the world. So with all that, just want to say thank you, Dan and Fred, for joining us today, and thank you all of you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, let us know by sharing it with your friends, connections, and followers, and make sure to like, follow, or subscribe to us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube, so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, this is YPO Presents.